there, Jeff.
This will be good to get an eDNA then for this primnode. Based on this view, I would say it's probably in the genus Narella, but yeah, it's not.
Jake, can you get the arm ready?
Is that a black coral in the background?
Can't tell if it's a stalked crinoid or a black coral.
Okay.
Gonna lean to stalked crinoid. But this will be good. At least if we're within proximity to a coral, we know that there's a good likelihood that if we do detect a primnoid eDNA signature, it's probably from something like this Narella. But at least we have a coral in the frame. We know.
Yeah.
Because down here, while we sequence broadly among the octocorals, it's always good to have a somewhat of an anchor.
Sure.
When you're testing and refining the method.
Right.
To
at least look for this.
Yeah.
So Steve, we're gonna take a Niskin here.
Yes, please.
Great.
They're all open.
Roger.
Jeff, could we change channel 3 to
back here?
Yeah, great. So for any audience that's joining us new, what we're about to do is fire a water sample, collect a water sample. So in the channel 3 view or the lower left quad, you see these gray cylinders.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
The manipulator is going to pull on a little lanyard that releases a pin that allows the top and bottom of those cylinders to close,
Maybe
capturing
6 down there.
6.
Yeah, about a 5-liter water sample, a little over a gallon. And we will then bring that back up to the ship and filter that water.
Nice.
And the idea here is that animals like these corals in front of us, this coral in front of us, crinoid, are shedding cellular material into the environment, and that material can be used for DNA sequencing to identify the organisms without actually having to collect them. This is work being done by, where is Meredith? She's a Marine Fisheries?
Yes,
Northwest Fisheries.
Northwest Fisheries Science Center.
Nice.
Yeah,
there you
Seattle.
go. This is
Got eyes on 6.
Yep, we got our eyes on it. We're pulling on the lanyard, and now you see the bottle has closed.
Nice. Pop.
Bottle 6.
All right, at least we got one sample on our shift.
Watch out for that coral. Yeah. eDNA really is a cool
What sample number?
technique
148.
148.
to be able to survey such a wide grouping of species within just a water sample, and so non-invasively.
Exactly.
Zoom out ahead here.
So we're on the move again to see a little bit more of the seafloor before we'll need to start coming off bottom and recovering our vehicles. The plan is to get the vehicles back on deck around noon today, Hawaiian time, and then we'll move the ship a little further southeast. Rennie, do you mind bringing up HIPAC to show the broader seamount area?
Sure.
So you can now see in channel 3, or the lower left part of the quad view, a map of the region we're working in. So we're currently at Sovereign Seamount in the center. We're going to be heading back to Tamana Seamount, which is just to our southeast. This is an area that we've previously dived on. We'll be doing another dive on this seamount on a different ridge. And
is this a Southeast Ridge technically Voyager seamount? Are they calling that something different?
That's a good question that I don't know the answer to, Rennie. In my mind, I thought it was a unnamed feature, so I am not sure. So that dive should be going in at about 4 p.m. Hawaiian time. Because we're so deep on today's dive, a little over 3 kilometers water depth, it takes a good bit of time to recover the vehicles, so we'll have about 3 hours of blue water to relax to for the remainder of the dive after we need to recover. Thanks, Rennie. You can zoom back in if you like.
Thanks.
Well, it sounds like the geology collections for those next dives could help us answer that question.
Yeah, that's a good point.
or not, because a lot of these seamounts are often named just based on the bathymetry, but geologically, yeah, until we get collections, data and collections, not very easy to tell those two things apart.
Yeah, correct. And, you know, our understanding of what this region looked like, we didn't understand that that was kind of a ridge feature before coming out here to do multi-beam mapping.
All right, Beth.
Yeah.
So we're running up on our time here.
Okay.
So we'll drop some plates and then get going.
Yeah, that's fine. And once you get at a good point, please let us know and we'll do our release
sure thing.
Protocol.
Thanks.
So everybody joining from home, online, please join us in saying farewell to Sovereign Seamount for now. Learned quite a bit about this environment just from the few hours we were on the seafloor today.
Yeah, how are we doing? How many rocks do we have in there? Do you guys know?
6.
6. Okay.
6 rocks? Okay, I'll drop 2.
But not big, ginormous rocks.
Oh, I see.
Just moderately sized.
Yeah. I mean,
moderately
some of them
sized.
are moderate
to big, but not ginormous like we've had on some of the previous dives.
I see. Okay.
Well, Beth, was any sediment collected on this seamount?
I don't believe so. That was not the intended focus of today's dive. And it's actually very difficult to get sediment samples from these seamounts. The sediment is relatively thin. And so our standard techniques for trying to collect that material are quite challenging. So what you're viewing now in channel 1, or the upper left part of the quad, is that we are dropping some steel plates onto the seafloor to help us become more positively buoyant, to help with our ascent. And attached to these steel plates is just a natural fiber. Both of these materials should degrade relatively rapidly without causing too much impact. And this is kind of a standard practice for working in the deep sea.
Yeah.
I changed the TVG down, but then cranked the regular gain. It's hard to know without knowing what they did.
Okay, let's just try going with 2.
All right, sounds good.
You'll see in the, well, actually you won't see, but if, one of the things we do on these dives is also mark when we collect samples, and we also mark where we deploy these weights, so that future exploration in this region knows where those materials are.
I think we'd be pretty safe to drop them in the water if we need to.
Sorry?
I think we'd be pretty safe to drop them in the water if we need to. Nothing down here. Yeah.
Jess, can you tell our audience what it is you're looking for in terms of deciding how much weight we need to release?
Yeah, we're just trying to get a decent ascent rate. So one that's not painfully slow, depending on how many rocks we collect. Yeah.
And what's the difference between slow and painfully slow?
Maybe 5 meters a minute.
I was going to say about 5 meters.
Got it.
Yeah.
So again, we're a little over 3,000 meters of water depth
yeah,
here.
117, yeah.
And so we are, I think, estimating about 200 minutes of ascent time. So we're trying to find a speed that gets us into that range based on what I overheard at breakfast this morning.
Yeah, back row, we're just going to get stretched out and start our ascent up, and then we'll be ready for the
Roger.
release.
So you can see now in the channel 3 view,
That's Argus. So you'll see Herc come up.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so we're seeing the view from Argus, and we're waiting for the lights of Hercules to show up so that it's an indication that they're both at roughly the same water depth and they can travel up into the water together.
Beth, can you say again what happens to that metal that was deposited?
Yeah, so it will rust is essentially what will happen. That iron and the steel plates it will essentially corrode by microbial-induced corrosion, as well as abiotic processes, and will turn into rust and basically just disintegrate. And again, the natural fibers are will also break down.
Thank you.
So,
Steve, just to verify, do we want to sample at 20 meters altitude?
No, I think it's okay this time.
Roger.
Okay, gonna log off bottom.
Roger.
I'll switch you over to USBL.
yeah, great. So now you can see in channel 3 the light at the end of Argus, which is Hercules.
All right, back row, we are ready for the release.
Thank you.
Copy that. So like we do at the end of every dive, we're going to do a special protocol off microphone that will allow us to release ourselves from this endeavor and be thankful and move on to the next task. So at this time, I'm going to invite everyone in the control van to mute your microphone. And for those listening at home, we'll be back on in just a moment.
All right. Welcome back. Thank you to Sovereign Seamount for being a pleasant place to visit. One thing I wasn't paying attention to while we were down here is what the direction of the current might have been.
It was pretty minimal.
Yeah.
I didn't notice myself, but based on how the ripples were, so what was that, south to north, I think?
Oh, yeah, I wasn't paying attention to our heading when we were looking at that either.
I think it was south to north.
Let's pull up those photos.
But Nav, can you zoom out on HiPAC to see how far we actually got along our dive track? To give the whole seamount perspective. Okay, so we surpassed it, basically.
Yeah, we did.
Yep. But the seamount continues up, of course. I think the summit's somewhere around the high 2000s.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, 29 something.
Is everyone ready for a hard-hitting question?
Hard-hitting. Oh, okay. I think my coffee is kicked in so far.
Has it recaffeinated enough? All right, this is for everyone. You're going to have to think about it. We can popcorn around as we can. But which film or book best reflects your passion for your work, fiction or nonfiction, or documentary?
Oh, okay. Define my
Too broad.
Define my profession in a movie or book.
Reflects your passion for your work. What movie or book inspires you?
Yeah,
that's a good question.
It is a really great question, and it's way too early. There's not enough caffeine.
Answer.
Yeah, I'm gonna mull on this for a minute.
All right,
but thanks for sending that question.
We have 3 hours.
I'm probably gonna change my answer over time.
I have one that I recently watched that maybe some viewers out there have seen. It's my octopus teacher.
Oh yeah,
which I thought was just a really beautiful, very simple story that really, you know, in my work, well, in a lot of our work, I think that technology enables and enriches a lot of our interaction with the ocean and with marine life. But in this case, it kind of stripped a lot of that away and was able to bring it back to something very simple and visceral in a connection with marine life. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's a nice one. I don't know, this is not going to be my final answer, but it is something that came to mind, which when I started my current job, I was asked by our communications team, like, how did you get into this? And the story that popped into my mind was when I was young, in a decade of the previous millennium, a documentary that I remember watching repeatedly, because we recorded it on our VHS, was a documentary about the discovery of the Titanic and the artifacts that were recovered, narrated by Telly Savalas. And I like have distinct memories of watching this. So not necessarily a good reflection of my passion, but it is definitely something I think of in terms of why I got into this profession.
That's a good answer.
I don't know if I can pinpoint a specific movie or publication, but like, so 2 resources that I can think of that might help to get a little more context is OEV.tv. And that's just like a native Hawaiian run and like staff like film crew sort of deal. So they're producing a lot of media and like doing a lot of research in terms of like some of the other films and stuff that are in Hawaii. So I'll go and check it out. They got a lot of sections about like like portions of the Hawaiian Renaissance and stuff like that, like caught on film. And I'd rather watch videos than read anything. So yeah, OEV TV is one. And then for anything that could like read and sort of that inspires me is anything that we can find on the Papakilo database. And that is a repository of Hawaiian language newspapers from like the mid 1800s, from the early 19th century all up until basically the mid 20th century and stuff. And so I find those, I mean, those are two very broad resources, but there's so much information that's contained in there in terms of our history as Hawaiians and stuff like that, and it's in the Hawaiian language as well. Anybody who's done a little bit of research out there knows that you can spend endless hours in there looking for something, or maybe finding stuff that you weren't looking for. So very broad, but definitely just two resources for people to look at. So OEV TV for all like the video stuff, and then Papakilo database for the sort of like the text, I guess, if you will, but Hawaiian language newspapers and stuff.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out that resource, or those resources. Front row, you guys have any?
Yeah, I was thinking about not saying something funny, try to say something serious.
Yeah. Funny or serious. Duty or leisure.
Duty or leisure. I guess like the broader, I'm just thinking of like films from that I watched when I was younger that may have kind of inspired this kind of direction. And I think one of them was Contact.
Yeah, I was
like
also thinking of that one.
General scientific exploration of the unknown and kind of, technology, perseverance, etc. But funny answer, Castaway.
Okay.
Did anyone watch Sequest?
I think I did.
Like a 90s like Star Trek, but in the ocean kind of show.
I believe Dr. Ballard had some advisory role in that.
Yeah, okay. The first season.
I definitely watched Galaxy Quest. Very different. There was also, I haven't watched the full collection of these cartoons, but Octonauts is also a fun one in terms of passion for deep sea work. That's my timer to remind me that I need to go join the interactions room soon.
Yeah, my two boys were watching the Octonauts and they were like, do you know about vampire squid? They were asking me all these things about, things I only just learned about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, really? Has it already entered 4-year-old brain space? Yep. We just saw one of those.
Yeah, but one of the things I like about that is the passion level, right? So for capturing the part of the question about passion, I think it's a good example. Like, yeah, go team.
I guess the funny answer for me would be Life Aquatic.
Oh yeah,
which is kind of a parody on what we do, I guess.
It's a regular.
One of my favorite lines from that movie is, we have no idea what's going to happen, and then we film it. And that's kind of exactly what we do.
That is true.
Good one.
There's a regular showing on the ship.
A more serious answer for me. It took me a few years to get through this book, only because dissertation stuff. But I read a book recently about Alexander von Humboldt, for which Nautilus is originally named in a previous life. And Humboldt was really kind of ahead of his time in the 18th and 19th century. He was one of the first naturalists to argue for the complexity of the environmental, the complexity of the environment, trying to take into account different types of measurements to explain patterns and processes, like geological observations combined with atmospheric observations, and then trying to map patterns of species distribution across mountains and landscapes. It's pretty phenomenal stuff.
Yeah, he's an early figure in geography.
Yeah, yeah.
Geography.
See his name all over the place these days, but yeah, really ahead of his time, and yeah, kind of a foundational person when it comes to talking about how humans can also affect the environment. I think he wrote quite a bit about how deforestation would eventually influence patterns of biodiversity, particularly in South America at the time. But yeah, very, very interesting character.
Mm-hmm.
So the title of that book was The Invention of Nature, and then the author was Andrea Wolf.
Same vein as Steve, I have a book that I haven't really finished yet or really gotten too far into, but I've been recommended like several times to read it. It's called A Half Mile Down by William Beebe.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a really cool story about like the original deep sea exploration and like the early submersibles back in like the 1930s, I think. And some of the like crazy creatures they saw and illustrations that were brought back up and I think published in newspapers and really got the first interest in exploring the deep sea. So from what I've read so far, it's really cool, but I just haven't really gotten around to it. And then I think a movie that came to mind originally was Master and Commander. I don't know.
I was thinking of that same one.
I really like that
Great
one.
movie.
That's like
still waiting for the sequel.
Yeah. Just like the Galapagos part of it too is just like so appealing. I don't know why.
Have you read any of the books?
I have. My dad has like the whole series of books, so I would always read some of them.
Yeah, those are great books. Great summer reading.
You guys have much more straightforward answers than my original one. That was very tangential. Niche. If anybody can find that online, that'd be awesome.
One of the books I read one year on Nautilus, down in the library, I think we have a copy, was called A Thread Across the Ocean, about how they develop technologies to measure the depth of the ocean in order to lay transatlantic cable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really interesting because it kind of gives some context and perspective to the science we do today in seafloor mapping and how difficult it actually was to tell the depth of the ocean back in the mid-19th century.
Lead lines.
Yep.
Yeah.
I always think it's funny that the term sounding predates sending acoustic pulses into the water to measure.
That is pretty ironic, yeah.
Steve, I'm going to hand over watch lead duties to you for a few moments while I go do a ship-to-shore interaction with a high school from Maine.
It's going to be tough, but I think we'll keep down
I
the fort.
have confidence in you. Okay. See you guys in a few minutes.
Try and keep the conversation going up here.
A little wobbly.
Yeah.
What?
That's a good
pun. Bottle 5 is a little wobbly. It's kind of dancing.
Notice she said good puns and not bad puns.
So that's just hose clamped. Jess has got one. I could tell.
Oh, I'm still mulling over good puns right now.
A pun? I almost dropped one earlier, but it was too early. Couldn't do it.
Yeah, just lay it out there, Jake.
Never too early.
It was well, we were talking about tunicates, and then we were talking about everyone tuning in, and I was like, everyone's tunicating in.
Okay.
That works. That works. I like it. Everyone was still just waking up back then, was it?
Yeah, I was like half asleep. Waking up still.
You'll always get a courtesy laugh from me.
I appreciate the courtesy, Steve.
I have a viewer shocked that no one's mentioned 20,000 leagues under the sea.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, Steve, Steve and I were on watch together and we were mapping. Why were we doing this? You were sitting back there and and I was mapping. We were both kind of there watching it for hours, and you put on the audiobook for 20,000
Oh,
leagues.
wow, that's a long time ago.
But you put it in like so we could hear it in our headsets.
Yeah, I remember that. We used to have the ability to, we sat watches in the control van in ages past for mapping.
Yeah.
We didn't have a control in the data lab. And so, yeah, I had an audiobook on, so I put an audiobook on, and while we were mapping, we listened to it.
That guy's voice was so...
I don't
it's
even
like
know.
Sean Connery.
It's a tough audiobook to listen to.
Yeah, it was maybe not the best choice while we're trying to like focus like on mapping and being subtly put to sleep.
I'm so happy many of our viewers are Sequest fans. That was a favorite of mine as well. Jeff, anything in particular? Books, movies that have inspired your passions?
Trying to troubleshoot something, but
oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. Star Trek, of course, was the huge thing. Saw that anything geek was Star Trek. Probably the first time that I heard anything by the Beatles pushed me into the music side of things, and from the music side of things into the technology side of things, into what I do now. And then, sure, yeah, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Jacques Cousteau's TV show, which I know in some respects is forbidden to talk about, but I was, and actually, I think Beth and I were talking about, or somebody, Sea Hunt. There used to be an old TV show back in the late 60s with Lloyd Bridges called Sea Hunt. That I caught a bit of an episode the other day or the other month, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is really bad. But when you're 5 years old, it was fascinating. So when somebody asked me to come out here, it was this culmination of the geek technology stuff. If you look, at this control room, it's very Star Trek-y-ish. In fact, if you look at the big 4 monitors up front here, those are 4 discrete monitors, and we slice them up so that everybody can see what they want to see. We also have a mode where we can actually make that one ginormous monitor, and it will display one picture. And because of, we actually refer to it as the Klingon High Command mode, because somebody came in the boat and said, "Yes, I want it to look like I'm talking to the Klingon High Command."
Is that a short-term button press, or is that?
It actually is not very very hard to do, but I would not do it during a dive.
Oh.
Yeah, please, not during a dive.
Yeah, that would
Come on. We all want to see it.
We all want to see Klingon
even if nothing else comes back.
It actually was. It turns it into a 4K image.
Oh.
Those 4 monitors stitched together become a 4K image.
Wow.
And so if we were running a 4K camera, theoretically the pilot could be sitting there looking at one ginormous 4K image of the front camera, and then fly blindly into walls and bounce off the floor and everything else.
But worth it. Do it for the shot.
Do it for the shot. Do it for, it's an art. Do it for the art. So yeah, there's a lot of books. The other side of my profession, not necessarily the being on Nautilus, but the video side of things, the television side of things. There was a book, or is a book, called The Box, An Oral History of Early Television.
Okay.
And and
Okay, good morning. Can you hear me?
on the wrong button.
I'm Afrodita Fuentes, Science Communication Fellow here aboard EV Nautilus.
How quick can I get there?
Lindsay went back there.
There we go. I think we took care of that. So anyway, that book was interesting simply because you would think that television is a fairly benign, it's television. And yet there were actually several individuals who died because of some of the things that they were trying to do. The most notable one was...
Wait, where? I'm sorry, I had to run.
Huh?
Who died?
Oh, in television. You know, you'd think that in the creation, there are people who've died in ocean exploration, there's people who've died in space, there's people who've died, you know, all over. There actually were people who died in the early ages of television trying to make television. You wouldn't think that television was like, you know, oh my goodness, I'm going to die by doing this. But yeah, so. Sorry, too early for death. Let's go back to Scotty. Scotty was my hero. Yay. And I'm going to jump off SPL here for a little bit because I've got to troubleshoot something. So.
All right, thanks, Jeff.
Bye.
Yeah.
That's true.
Jess, anything come into mind for you that highlights your passions or has sparked inspiration?
Yeah. Not necessarily something that describes my current profession. I guess one movie from when I was growing up that got me really interested in exploration, though, was The Mummy. And so that was, I like that movie, the spirit of adventure and exploration. And I would watch that religiously almost to a point of an unhealthy extreme. Brendan Fraser, exactly. But just the sensation of going on these expeditions, going on these explorations, and always having some unforeseen events. But that really got me really interested in exploring. I would begin to hide artifacts and then try to forget about them, and then try to re-find them a couple weeks later. And I like stage out. I don't know, you know, just yeah. So short answer, probably just the sense of exploration from The Mummy. And then I was trying to think, yeah, I don't have like really any good aquatic themed ones.
It's cool, thank you. Well, you're hearing the voices here of our 8 to 12 watch on exploration vessel Nautilus. We have wrapped up our 11th dive as part of our Lu'ua Ea a Hiki Ika Papaku expedition. This particular dive was on Sovereign Seamount, and it was a relatively short dive, just about 6 hours on the seafloor. And because of the depth, we started, or when we left the sea bottom, it was about 3,000 some meters deep, and so we are ascending back to the surface, and it will take a little bit of time. What is our ascent rate currently?
Currently 16 meters a minute for a total time to surface of 163 minutes.
So that is the amount of time that we will be here together in blue water. Feel free to pop in your questions or comments. That comment box is available on nautiluslive.org. The chat feature's not on the YouTube channel.
Yeah, now's a good time to ask us questions that we sometimes don't have too much time to answer on the seafloor.
Yeah, some of those more open-ended questions. Now's a great time. Here's one to bounce around. If you could name a new species, what would you name it? Steve, have you been able to name any new species?
One in process right now, but unfortunately it's not always up to the whims of the person describing it. There are actually rules. The International Code of Zoological Nomenclature holds a series of rules that should be followed regarding the naming of species. So yeah, it has to do with just agreement of the genus and species name. If you name it after a particular individual, there are rules about that as well. So they have a website. You can go check out their full regulations. It's quite extensive for naming species. But yeah, folks can check that out at the ICZN, International Code of Zoological Nomenclature website. I'm sure you can find it by Google or something like that.
And do I recall that as part of our permitting, there was some language around that if new species were discovered, that the trustees would be involved in that?
Yeah, that's always the hope, right? We don't do any species descriptions, within our organization, as scientists. Oftentimes, many of these species descriptions may happen years down the line. So part of the goal of including the permits and suggestions from the monument in exchange for working in the monument, we include those suggestions with our specimens in the repositories they go to. So generally, I don't know how enforceable some of those rules are, because some of these specimens might not be described for decades, So it's under the hope, though, that scientists abide by those agreements.
Mm-hmm. A mom is writing in that she just got excited and told her kid that she should be on the Nautilus because Sequest and the Mummy are her two favorite go-to rewatches.
Hey, there you go.
Sounds like a match.
Come join the ROV team. So Steve, you gave us the rules for naming species, but you didn't actually give a name that you'd give to a species yourself.
Say again?
I said you gave us the rules to naming species, but yeah. what type of, if you had some incredible coral that you found, new species, if you had the power, what would you name it?
I'm of the mind that species either should be named for the place in which they're found or some sort of innate characteristic that makes them unique. For example, color of the coral found in situ, or some sort of something descriptive of its morphology, like if there's ornamentation or something like that that makes it unique. But at the same time, there's a lot of species who are that are described after the locations in which they're found. One that's common around here is Paracalyptrophora. It's a shallower coral. We haven't seen it here, this particular species, but the species name is hawaiiensis. So it's found and described from around Hawaii.
So Steve the sponge is off the table?
Sponge? What?
Yeah, that Steve the sponge. I think there'd be nothing funnier than naming someone who's a coral expert, naming a sponge after them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you see those things on the news all the time. Somebody gets something named after them. It's kind of ironic, but
it's like when people name a dog a cat, or like a cat dog. You name a sponge coral.
Coral. I mean, I think one of the rules of the ICZN is that it has to be it can't be ambiguous as to what it is. Like you can't do things that are inherently confusing. But I'll have to double check on that.
I don't know. The Tronclops fish was pretty confusing. I thought it was a robot, and then
Right.
you know,
Tronocops.
Tronoclop.
Yeah, it turns out we were way wrong.
Yeah.
So we would name something collectively Tronoclops, which is the correct way to say Tronocops.
We found a cyborg on the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah.
Troniclops.
That's why the front row is not in charge of naming things. The back row is in charge of naming things.
But yeah, there's been some really cool named things lately in other languages, like in Hawaiian, like we have the gold coral around here, kulamanamana, which is not Latin, but it agrees with the you know the basic principles of the ICZN. So that's interesting. I think that was 2012 that was described.
That's cool.
Recently.
Maybe a question for those who have been here a little longer. Do we do projects alongside with space-based organizations? Seems like a good match.
So you said, do we collaborate with space organizations?
Yeah, space-based organizations.
Yeah, so we've worked in tandem with different departments of NASA. Some are on the technology side. We were talking about a couple days ago. We used a rock grabber. What was that called? It had a name.
The microspine based.
Yeah. That was in collaboration with engineers at NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. We worked with NASA on a subsea project. That's an acronym, and I can't remember what it stands for, but we were working on Mars analog of kind of the idea of delayed communications between Earth-based mission control and operations team elsewhere, either in space or on Mars. And so we were using deep sea as an analog, and with some forced communication delays and kind of mimicking the fact that we could perhaps, be watching, the video that was sent from far away, but there would be a delay, and kind of expressing and exploring the frustrations of, that delayed communication of, oh, that's actually what I want you to do there, and then it's 14 minutes later that they receive, they receive it 7 minutes later, and you find out 7 minutes after that. Kind of working through those, which, went as well as you expect for first run, kind of going through that kind of stuff.
How does it work when a cliff suddenly approaches?
Yeah, I mean, so for that, it relies on the operations team being well versed in what the goal is, and therefore that goal has to be well expressed in advance. As far as things on the ground, you have to trust that that team is going to avoid obstacles, and so they're actually the operators are they're doing it. So in our case, our quote astronauts were on the ship, and so you realize the importance of well-defined plans, and it is a bit difficult because you have scientists who perhaps have a goal and they know that, oh, well, if this didn't happen, then I would do this instead. But if that isn't expressed
to someone who's in charge of doing it. Something that may seem intuitive or, you know, what you would normally do in that scenario if you had XYZ background isn't going to be the same decision that someone else would make with a different background. Those are 2 instances. I'm trying to think others off the top of my head. But
yeah, thanks, Renato.
sure.
Renato, do you do you know of any plans to put Hercules and Argus under the ice of Europa?
Not these particular vehicles. I think that
as is with no changes.
No
yeah, as is.
As is.
As is. We're just shipping them off in a big old shipping container. They will arrive when they get there. No, but there's long-term talks of exploring ocean worlds, and what better way to test technology that is towards that end than by exploring the Earth's oceans. So there's been, yeah, some kind of collaboration in that regard. The Abyss lander, I think, is part of that when we were using the optical modem. So basically a means of having a base station receive information from a remote entity and then sending that through space, sending the signals. But
thanks for tuning in, everyone, with your questions and comments. Yeah, for those curious why we are already ascending, this was the dive plan. It was a relatively short dive. We launched around 12 a.m. Hawaii Standard Time. We've been on the seafloor for the past, I don't know, 6 or so hours, and now we are ascending. It was a relatively deeper dive than some of the dives we've done in the past few days. So we left the seafloor at around 3,000 meters and are ascending at a rate of about 15 meters a minute. And with that timing, we should be back on deck close to our target of 12 p.m. Hawaii Standard Time. Question for Kalamehu, what is the strangest thing you have seen on a dive?
It's honestly all new to me. So what was like
what's the strangest thing?
the strangest thing? I'll have to say those fish, or like the eel-like fish too, just because, like, you know, you see fish in like, I'm kind of used to more like, I guess, shallow water species and stuff like that. So being able to be here in a completely different environment with all these very
long,
different,
skinny,
yeah,
eel-like fish.
No, it's kind of cool. I mean, yeah, I can be the fish, just because they're also like the most lively, or not lively, but I guess like they're the most active things on here. So I guess I'm more used to that type of like having more fish in the area. So I'm like, ooh, yeah. But anything that moves faster than coral at this point.
They are a little faster than coral, for sure. Steve, are there any ocean explorers that you admire?
yeah, let's see. Ocean Explorer is such a narrow job title. You know, we're all kind of ocean explorers out here, whether we're scientists or engineers. You know, frankly, I have to say that most of my folks that I've am, inspired by are largely find ways to navigate both the complexities of conducting science in the deep ocean, as well as, utilizing and developing new technologies for ocean exploration. So I would say, a mix of both of those kinds of aspects are folks that really inspire me.
Thanks.
Don't want to show any favoritism to anyone.
Good political answer. Yeah. Steve, do we have an estimate on our next dive? I don't know.
Dive time?
Dive time?
1600, I think, local. Yeah.
Okay. There's your answer. 1600, so 4 p.m. Hawaii time should be our next launch.
Pretty fast turnaround.
Yeah.
Though I haven't gotten the dive plan yet, so that could change.
I'm not seeing it either. What's the coolest thing we've seen today? So this watch actually came on toward the end of this relatively short dive. We do 4-hour watches, and we had about 45 minutes on the seafloor. We saw some interesting tunicates and some stocked crinoids, but the main priority of this dive was really to grab some rocks for dating the ancient volcano, and we're heading back to the surface to pop over to a different seamount. Yeah, I don't think we've even seen the sunrise at this point. It was dark when we came in the van, so not a lot that we've seen yet. Jake, what's the deepest that the ROVs can go, and how much does depth affect control inputs? Are you guys working on something up there?
Sorry, we just came back online. We were talking through some recovery potential difficulties. Did we miss anything?
No. Do you have time to take a question?
Sure.
Yeah, so question for Jake. What's the deepest the ROVs can go, and how much does depth affect the control inputs?
So Hercules is rated to 4,000 meters, and Argus is rated deeper, I think to 6,000 meters. So really we're limited with the 2-vehicle operation to go to 4,000 meters. So today we were kind of pushing that. We went to 3,300 on descent. And what was the second part of the question?
How much does the depth affect the control inputs?
Doesn't affect anything we're doing in the van because we have fiber optic communications, so there's no like lag time or anything. But there is that component of Argus being tethered to the ship, and so when we move, if we're deeper, there's that lag time, and the ship will step forward 50 meters, and then Argus will, it takes about, I don't know, Renim knows this better, but 15, 20 minutes for Argus to feel that movement if we were stationary. So that's really what plays into it. So it's kind of like a game you have to play on the seafloor. But that's really the main